The future. The polar ice caps have melted, covering the Earth with water. Those who survived have adapted to a new world.
Hiding something.
Maybe he's a smoker spy. Gills.
The summer of 1995, Waterworld hit the big screen, produced on the largest budget to date at roughly $175 million. Due to many delays on the production and arguments between Kevin Costner and the director Kevin Reynolds, costs had escalated and Kevin Costner said it was the longest shoot he'd ever been on, coming to 157 days. Bad press had plagued the production before its release, which some may say affected its box office results. Now there is a misconception that the film was a box office bomb. Domestically it did about $88 million and worldwide it made its full budget back. So there was profit, but most of the income was taken from the huge advertising campaign. Once it came to TV and home video, it made a healthy profit. So it wasn't a complete disaster like the recent Lone Ranger and John Carter. Filming took place in a large artificial seawater enclosure, similar to one that was used in the film Titanic 2 years later. It was located in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Hawaii. Kevin Costner plays the nameless hero. Kevin's performance has been discussed a lot by critics and viewers of the movie. Some enjoy his cold attitude, but many felt his performance was very bland and dull. He spends the majority of the time not being a very likeable character, until 3/4 of the way into the movie. Kevin does look like he has put a lot of effort into the action scenes. There's barely a moment where there appears to be no stunt double for him. It's a very physically demanding role, and he does a fantastic job. Dennis Hopper plays the leader of the smokers, the Deacon. Dennis Hopper is a great villain, and is kind of played for laughs and has a few funny scenes, but he doesn't have a threatening presence. His character is kind of toned down for a family movie. Helen and Enola are okay, and both provide good performances. The character Helen had a lot of her dialogue trimmed, and that turned up in the extended cut. So her character does work better in that version. The little girl Enola I don't find to be that irritating, but like kids in movies, they sometimes ruin it for an adult audience, but she doesn't really cross that line. For years I hadn't seen her in many films until she popped up in Napoleon Dynamite, and she gave a really good performance. Dennis Hopper's assistant, called the Nord, played by Gerard Murphy, who is often cast as a villain due to his imposing stature. He popped up in Batman Begins as the corrupt High Judge. Some of the scenes he is in, I find it really hard to fully understand what he is saying. It seems like his dialogue is a bit muffled. It could just be me not listening properly. But I love his hair though. It looks like he's got a lion's mane. In the beginning of the 21st century, the sea level has risen hundreds of meters, covering every continent and turning Earth into a water planet. Human population has been scattered across the ocean in individual isolated communities, consisting of artificial islands and mostly decrepit sea vessels. It was so long since the events that the humans eventually forgot that there were continents in the first place, although many believe that there is a mythical place on Earth called dry land. The human population also forgot their technological advancements and knowledge they previously had, replaced those with desire of survival, hence their ramshackle architecture and post-apocalyptic setting. A drifter, only known as the Mariner, sails the open seas. He enters an artificial atoll city in the shallow part of the ocean seeking to trade dirt, which is a precious commodity. He is instantly asked how he found it, but he refuses to answer. It is later revealed that he is not human, but a mutant with webbed feet and gills, an evolutionary step in some of the humans to accommodate the changes in climate. The fearful atollers who despise mutants vote to recycle him by drowning him in a yellowed sludge brine pool. Just as they begin lowering him into the sludge, local pirates known as smokers raid the atoll. The smokers are searching for an orphaned girl named Enola, who had drifted to the atoll alone in a basket and has what appears to be a map and directions to dry land tattooed on her back, this information having been gathered by a smoker spy known as the Nord, who had been posing as a trader, then ironically overlooked as they imprisoned the Mariner for his crime. Leading the raid is the Deacon, captain of the derelict oil tanker and the overall leader of the smokers. They are known as such due to the crude fuel they create, using oil from the tanker to power their machines. He wants the map to dry land so he can be the first to claim it and build a city in which he will rule. The extended version, which was shown on TV, was released on DVD and runs to nearly 3 hours long, which is not a recommended length for this story. It does show more character development and shows the populace on the floating town deciding what to do with Costner and their feelings on mutants, and they even threaten to get rid of the girl and her guardian, Helen, because they know the smokers are after the girl for the location to dry land. One scene has Dennis Hopper's character playing golf, and he gets frustrated with his false eye and he discusses his plans for the future when he finds dry land. One scene which I really like is when Costner's character plays music. He has a battery on his boat rigged to a CD player and he plays some jazz music. After his boat is destroyed and he encounters the survivors from the floating town, he decides to leave everyone and go out on his own, and he decides to go back to the remains of his ship. And he finds the drawings Enola did, and he has a change of heart and goes back to them and decides to save the girl. The ending has an extended conversation between Helen and Costner. He wants to find more of his kind. Instead of the original version, he just gets spooked out by being on dry land, and with that being his only motive to leave, and you actually find out the land they discover is Mount Everest. The majority of the scenes are just extended bits of dialogue that don't really push the story and were obviously cut for a reason. I wouldn't say this was a superior cut and improves the film, but it does help some minor plot points and some missing scenes of character development. The stunts and action set pieces are fantastic in Waterworld, but it does feel like you're watching a staged show because it all seems a bit too choreographed. Universal Studios obviously felt the same because it was turned into a show at their theme park. I believe it's one of their most popular shows and is still running today. The movie does use CGI in a number of scenes and it has dated okay in some areas. The big monster in the sea looks a bit weak, and there are some dodgy blue screen shots during the end sequence in the air balloon, but the impressive stuff is the underwater sequence where you get to see the destroyed cities. James Howard Newton's score is fantastic. He was hired at the last minute to replace Mark Isham. The soundtrack boosts the kind of energy and suspense sorely lacking from the on-screen narrative. Composed in true epic blockbuster fashion, it has a great theme that runs throughout the film, and the haunting atmospheric track called The Bubble beautifully captures the tranquil beauty of life below the ocean's surface. Producing a score at a quick pace, Howard has provided some of his best work. The score is available on iTunes and on CD. Waterworld was released on a number of computer platforms. The Super Nintendo version was released in 1995 in Europe by Ocean Software. It was only released in European territories, but an American version had been scheduled for release in December of 95. But it never turned up, probably down to the appalling reviews it received. The game was played from an overhead isometric perspective, with the player controlling the mariner's boat on the ocean. The point of the game was to destroy the smokers' boats and dive for sunken artifacts. A Mega Drive version of the game was also done by Ocean, planned for a release in Europe in the fall of 95. It was never distributed though. A complete version of the game was eventually leaked on the net and is playable via emulation. Ocean Software had totally lost their talent when it came to their output of work in the early 90s. The dreaded Virtua Boy game focused around the main character's outrigger boat, where the player moves around a 3D world shooting enemies. it was voted the worst game for the failed Nintendo product. Waterworld for Windows and MS-DOS PCs was released in 1997 by Interplay. Unlike Ocean's shooter games, Waterworld for PC was a real-time strategy game, with the player leading a squad of up to 14 men to battle for possession of the film's floating atolls. Each squad member has their own special abilities, and the player can purchase and upgrade their weapons and equipment. In addition, the player must defend their own fortress from smoker attacks. This seems to be the best tie-in game for the film. I think the biggest problem with Waterworld is its pacing and overall length. Its story is way too thin and lacking in detail to stretch over 2 hours. It's like a 60-minute plot that's been heavily dragged out. Obviously, being heavily inspired by Mad Max, it is essentially Mad Max on water. So it's not entirely original, and it's nothing we haven't seen before. The movie spends too long showing you how things work, especially Costner's boat, which is perfectly fine and does look great, and you can see where the money has been spent, but once you've shown it, you don't need to continue showing it at great lengths. The later scenes need serious trimming. Costner's performance is very bland and not really a character the audience can invest in. We are shown he changes over time to be more sympathetic and caring. I think he is a great actor, but action roles aren't really his thing. I think just in the 90s, film studios felt that this was the right direction for him. With his character being a mutant, which suggests the world has been covered in water for hundreds of years for human evolution to even take place, but it seems Costner is the only mutant in the film. It suggests they have encountered others, but I find it odd he is the only one. I suppose it's done to have him be some sort of hero in the film with a gift no one else has. The idea of the polar ice caps melting is a great idea, but the backstory is wafer thin, and I always wanted more. It would be more interesting to have footage of the oceans destroying the cities and showing survivors coping with no land for its prologue. With it receiving a 12 rating or say PG-13, it generally fits nicely into that family adventure romp, with enough action to satisfy adults, but the tone switches now and again, and most evidently during the scene where Costner meets the lonely trader who wants some time alone with a child, but Costner refuses and lets him spend time with Helen. This whole scene feels really inappropriate and should have been rewritten. The action, goes without saying, is very impressive, but as discussed before, it feels like you're watching a staged show, like the Universal Studios ride. The director Kevin Reynolds staged some fantastic set pieces, and the end battle on the ship, even though it is kind of short, is very entertaining and probably the standout moment of the film. I think the problem with having a film set all on water, it does leave you a bit limited to staging different action scenes. Once you are on land, you can be far more creative. So once you've seen the battle on Atoll, everything on water afterwards doesn't leave you as excited until the end battle on the ship. Waterworld certainly doesn't deserve the bashing it gets. It certainly needs trimming to improve its pacing to a more enjoyable level. For a summer blockbuster and the huge amount of money involved, they should have spent more time on the script to give it some meat and improve its narrative. It'd be interesting to find out what caused the clashes between the director and Costner. I think it's down to egos. Both very credible and talented directors, and one being the star of the film, it's naturally going to cause issues on a creative level. It's a flawed film and many find it difficult to sit through and probably find it very dull, but if it manages to keep your attention, it does have great production design, beautiful photography, a thrilling soundtrack and exciting action scenes.
I want the girl.
You know, I thought you were stupid, friend. But I underestimated you.